On this edition of Independent Sources, Haitians at the border. Thousands clamor for asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border with no relief in sight. And sinuous Serena, remembering the woman who popularized belly dancing in the United States. Those stories and more coming up.
Independent Sources, your window to the city's ethnic and immigrant communities. Here's your host, Garry Pierre-Pierre.
Thousands of Haitians are stuck in Tijuana, Mexico, hoping to get into the United States. These people thought all they had to do was show up, ask for asylum, and get in. But this September, as the number of Haitians seeking refuge increased, the Obama administration stepped up deportations. Aid workers estimate that there are about 5,000 Haitians on Tijuana's border with San Diego, with more coming daily. In studio with me to talk about what brought these Haitians to the border and their chances of getting into the U.S. is Jocelyn McCalla, CEO of the consulting firm JMC Strategies. Welcome. So, Jocelyn, what are 5,000 Haitians doing at the U.S.-Mexico border?
The 5,000 Haitians that you're referring to are Haitians who initially went to, and in fact were perhaps recruited to work in Brazil, for example, during the time when Brazil was preparing for the Olympics.
And also the World Cup, they had a lot of work.
The Olympics and the World Cup, so the Haitian construction workers, and many of them went with their families or petitioned for their families to join them. And now, as you know, the Brazilian economy, as well as all the construction work that was going on is not done. So they're no longer needed. They are living in poverty in Brazil, in Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro. And therefore, they're basically looking at opportunities elsewhere at this stage. So these are Haitians who have traveled all the way from Brazil, South America, some of them by boat, some of them by train, some of them by bus, some of them on horses or donkeys. So it's a very long ride with the hope that when they do get to the border with Mexico, with the United States in Mexico, as you say in Tijuana, that they would be able to petition the U.S. government for entry in the United States on the basis that the Haiti has not recovered yet from the earthquake, obviously from the latest.
But who gave them that idea? Because I think it's somewhat fanciful that just because you're at the border of Mexico, the U.S. will let you in. Where did they get the?
Well, I'm not sure it's a crazy idea. The United States at some point in time, and way back in time, I'm going to take you back to 1980. When faced with an influx of Haitian refugees seeking asylum in the United States introduced the idea of a special status for Haitians and Cubans. It was called the Cuban-Haitian entrance status, which is President Carter was in office at the time. There were elections. There were outrage by the Congressional Black Caucus and a number of civil rights organizations that Haitians were being discriminated against. So that status was implemented and has been in effect since then.
Oh, it has.
It has been in effect since then. So a number of Haitians, the very first Haitians who appeared at the border and petitioned the United States, basically. They were allowed in.
Okay, so the word traveled back there
Absolutely.
that this is a conduit into the U.S.
Right. Yeah, they were allowed in as Cuban-Haitian entrant, and some of them were released.
But now we see the Obama administration has taken a hardline policy towards those refugees and asylum seekers, we call them, and deported some back to Haiti. So the 5,000 people there right now remain in limbo. What's going to happen to them?
Well, the truth is that about 4,000 were admitted to the United States.
4,000 were?
4,000 were admitted in the United States. They've strained the resources of many humanitarian organizations set up to provide assistance to refugees and immigrants. And some of them are in custody. Some of them were released to relatives, and some of them have made their way to Miami or elsewhere where they have relatives. But most of them are in the southern border area. There are, in addition to these Haitians, several thousand more stranded in Tijuana.
Presumably more are coming.
Presumably more are coming, presumably more on their way. But the fact is that it's a very small number. Compared to the number of people that have tried to enter the United States from the southern border, it's a very small number. But in the context of the elections that were taking place earlier this year.
Were you talking about Haiti or U.S.?
Oh, no, I'm talking about the U.S. elections. Talking about the U.S. elections.
Okay.
With immigration being one of the factors that were the driving force behind Trump's candidacy, Obama saw fit to ensure that the Democrats were not going to be caught with their
being weak on immigration.
Being weak on immigration. So the Haitians, unfortunately, don't have a large constituency in the United States, large politically organized constituency in the United States. Therefore, they were easy pickings, so to speak. So that's what happened. But what has not but most of these people are still here in the United States. Most of the people, because...
So those who were admitted here, are they going to provide some kind of temporary protected status, or what's going to happen to them?
No, there's not going to be any temporary protected status. TPS, as it is called, is a special status granted to people stranded in the United States as a result of earthquake or hurricane and so on. TPS was granted to Haitians back in 2010. It has been renewed, but I don't think it's going to be extended.
So what's going to happen to these people, Jocelyn?
Well, it's not just the 4,000 Haitians who have been admitted in the United States who we're concerned with. We're talking about the several more thousand people who were granted TPS. So what's going to happen?
Let's put that's a separate category. Let's discuss those.
They're going to be very quickly
put together?
Be put together.
Okay. How so?
Because if the TPS status is not extended by the new administration, they are going to be found to be illegally living in this country, and therefore they have to either voluntarily return to Haiti or they're going to be deported.
You wrote about that in the Haitian Times in the column. Why are you so optimistic that, not optimistic, you're so sure that it's likely to happen that they will be deported?
Well, because, as I mentioned earlier, I think the one thing that characterizes the Haitians is that although they have much visibility in the United States, the political constituency that they need in order to ensure that they're protected from very harsh measures, is not there.
Let's pick up on that point. You mentioned that earlier, and now you brought it up again, about the Haitian community's lack of organization, lack of political savvy. But you're saying this at a time when we're seeing so many more Haitian Americans being elected to public offices in South Florida, here in New York, and in other places in Illinois and in other places. And so what about these elected officials? What roles are they playing in ensuring a fair immigration status for Haitians here?
Well, they could play a key role, except that they're disorganized, they're not organized. So to some extent, is what the Haitians say, grand cinq. For
those people who don't know, it's somebody who's out there in the limb.
That's correct. So they're out there on their own. They're advancing perhaps their own agenda and perhaps their own standing within the community in which they've been elected, but they are not organizing themselves in such a way as to become a powerful Haitian American constituency, and that is what is lacking. Obviously, Haitians are going to be finding themselves at a very weak situation, but so are going to be a number of other immigrants. So there's an opportunity for Haitians to tack on, to other advocacy efforts that are being made. But it does happen that I think that part of the solution resides in the ability of the Haitians themselves, to get their act together and making sure that they understand what can be achieved within that particular context that we're living in.
What about Haiti itself? I mean, as you know, Hurricane Matthew did a serious, considerable damage to the southern peninsula of the country, which is one of the bread baskets of the country, destroy livestock and everything else. And so is Haiti able to absorb these people back?
Haiti was not able to absorb these people back in the first place. It's not going to be able to absorb them unless it really develops its own vision for the future. The fact is that part of what we're facing now in Haiti is the fact that there is not that much of a response from abroad, from Haitians or from the international community with respect to coming to terms with Haiti. Haitians are clearly skeptical of efforts being made, and to some extent they are pulling themselves by their bootstraps, but not necessarily with an idea of how to go beyond simple recovery efforts. And what Haiti needs right now is really to develop a sort of a vision of the future that is going to be able to attract the kind of investment that Haiti needs in order to go forward, able to deal with do-gooders, so to speak, so that they are in charge, they are driving the efforts to change the country rather than anybody else who's coming in with the means dictating what's going to happen. And then eventually end up dealing with international allies that have sort of been at Haiti's bedside for years now.
So what's going to happen now with those immigrants coming, leaving Brazil, leaving Chile, it's another place that they come from, coming into Mexico and standing at the border? Will the U.S. or the Mexican authorities be able to stop their entry into Mexico?
Well, the Mexico is not able to stop their entry into Mexico. So perhaps in coordination with the United States, and the United States has provided a lot of resources to Mexico to prevent Central American immigrants from coming there. So Mexico is seen as the first obstacle to migrating to the United States. So perhaps in Mexico we'll enjoy more resources from the United States. But this said, I think Haitians should brace themselves for the fact that the doors of the United States are closed to them. Entry as asylum seekers or refugees is going to be really closed. And the other avenue that might be available to them, which is family reunification for people who are admitted as immigrants, but just waiting for an interview date at the American consulate in Port-au-Prince. For these people, the process is going to be slowed down. Mm-hmm. So I think that what it does say to me is that it puts the onus on the Haitians themselves to figure out exactly what they want out of life, whether or not they're going to face the reality and really do something about their environment, their country, their leadership, or they're going to try to sort of put their hands up in the air and say, we can't do anything and let's be done with it.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. Jocelyn McCalla, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Gary.
When we come back, celebrating nearly a quarter of a century of bringing independent films to U.S. audiences. Thanks for staying tuned. The African Diaspora International Film Festival is back for its 24th year. The festival is currently running 66 films from 30 countries. With me in studio to talk about the festival is one of its founders, Diara Ndao Speck. Welcome, Diara.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with a look at an excerpt from the trailer of one of the featured films, Spirits of Rebellion.
Several years after the Watts Uprising of 1965, a few progressive professors at the University of California, Los Angeles, started an experimental program to teach Latino, Asian American, Native American, and Black students how to make films. To say the least, the Ethno-Communications program, as it was called, led to some unexpected outcomes, like the one you see here. This is the opening scene of Bush Mama, the thesis film of my filmmaking mentor, Haile Garima. It's one of the few moments that wasn't scripted. That's him on the left there, his film shoot interrupted by the LAPD, suspicious of a black man with a camera. Though it only lasted a few years, and though few people know about it today, the ethno-communications program led to an important movement. This was the beginning of what we now call the LA Rebellion, the first ongoing effort by a collective of black film artists in the United States to create a form of cinema attentive to the lives and concerns of their own communities. I was inspired by these filmmakers, and when I went to UCLA Film School in the 1980s, I became a part of their movement. Now that the UCLA Film and Television Archive is getting us filmmakers back together and preserving our films, I am determined to document our story.
Very fascinating film. So what's the impact of that program at UCLA on filmmaking in general in this country?
Well, it's very interesting because as you will see when you see the film, the impact was twofold. On one hand, a lot of the filmmakers were able to create work that was very original, that was different from the blaxploitation and the Hollywood film that you would see and the representation of black filmmakers. So you have some films that received some acclaim, like Daughters of the Dust that you see here, Sankofa, and also Charles Burnett, who did Killers of Sheep. But at the same time, their films were never really appropriated by the mainstream. And so they were never able really to develop a career as filmmaker. And as you see in the film, now they are primarily teachers, they are educators. They see film as an educational tool, but from a commercial standpoint, they were not able to really achieve a lot of success. And to me, that is very much a reflection of the fact that when you try to have a more reflexive, constructive way of looking at Black life, you don't get accepted. Only the stories that are very stereotypical are the ones that make it through the mainstream.
You would think after 20, 30 years of the struggle, if you will, with Hollywood having this reputation of being so liberal, and it's so difficult to have quality films being made about Black lives in America. Why is that?
Well, I think that there are now quality films that are being made, but they are not controversial. So the quality film that's currently out there is Moonlight. Okay, it's a beautiful film. It's receiving a lot of awards. It's made by an independent African-American filmmaker. And it's a coming of age story of a young man who discovers that he is gay. So it's a simple storyline. This storyline is not controversial. It's not questioning anything. It's not saying, the system is discriminating against us. It's not saying capitalism has a negative impact on our lives. It's not being critical. Therefore, it goes through. These filmmakers had something to say. They wanted to bring awareness of the concerns of the Black community, of the people who were discriminated against, who were having difficulties just having a decent life. And
is it difficult to do a quality film, a social film about social issues, and get commercial success? Are the two incompatible?
Well, it's not that they are incompatible necessarily, but it is that there will be a lot of resistance within the industry to support that kind of film. So there's a political decision and there's an economic decision. The economic decision is you are told people are not going to come out to see this film, so we don't want to put our money behind it. But really, it's also a political decision. There are some stories that they do not want to be told. In the media and journalism in general, people have this perception that, controversy sells, and the more controversial the subject, the more likely people are to pick up the newspaper, to tune in. Why is it so different in films? I think I can make an analogy between this and our own film festival. We present 66 films from many different countries, and the quality of the films we have are top of the line. We have films that have been at Toronto, at Cannes Film Festival. And when people see these films, they are extremely impressed. Yet, the mainstream press does not cover this film festival because the films are not perceived as being films with celebrities, and they are Black films, and they are not interested in promoting Black culture. As a result, we end up having wonderful films and wonderful audiences, but sometimes in small numbers.
So basically, you're preaching the choir. You're not broadening the base with these films.
Well, how can you, unless you have millions of dollars to advertise, in the mainstream? Mm-hmm. There's a it's like, I think what we experience in the film festival is the same thing that these filmmakers at from the UCLA, from the Black LA Rebellion are facing. It's the same kind of challenges.
Quickly, talk to us about another film in the series. Obviously, you have 66 films.
Right.
It's quite a bit. So there's a particular film that you would like to talk about.
Yeah, there's one that's very interesting. And that one is controversial, but it does attract people because they're very curious about it. It's called Gurumbe, Afro-Andalusian Memory. And it is a story about slavery in Spain. There's a historian that did research and that discovered that slavery was very common in Spain, especially in Andalusia. She found deals of slaves, basically, that were being sold in Seville and different places. And there was a whole market, and the entire Andalusia region was really dependent on slavery for its economic growth. And then what she does is she shows that there's an influence of African music on flamenco. So she shows how Africans were able to actually influence the creation of the flamenco. A couple of years back, we had another film called Tango Negro, The African Roots of Tango, and it was saying the same thing. What's happening is there's a denial within those societies, whether it's Spain or Argentina.
Or Latin America in general.
Or Latin America in general, of the influence of Africans on the culture. And the reason is it's a means for them to maintain a certain level of marginalization of those societies and not incorporate them. Because how can you deny existence to someone when you acknowledge their contribution to your own culture? So, and it's the same reason why we are having so much difficulty getting the word out on these films. But on the other hand, once we get the word out, people are really fascinated.
Speaking of getting the word out, where can people see these films?
We have screenings at Teachers College Columbia University on 120th Street between Broadway and Amsterdam. We have screenings at Cinepolis Chelsea Cinema, which is on 23rd Street, also at Mist Harlem on 116th Street. And people can also go to our website to get all of the details, and that website is nyadiff.org.
Diara, thanks for joining me in studio.
Thank you for having me.
The African Diaspora Film Festival will continue until December 11th. Stay tuned. When we come back, we learn more about the woman who popularized belly dancing in America. Finally, from us, the Serena Belly Dance Museum is a unique exhibit dedicated to the life and work of the late legendary belly dancer Serena Wilson. The collection is filled with rare artifacts and Greektown memorabilia, most of which were collected by Serena herself. Crystal Lowe tells us more about Wilson's influence on belly dancing in America and the exhibition that was created by her son, Scott.
29th Street used to be the center of New York City's Greektown, a gone but not forgotten string of bars, restaurants, and nightclubs that catered to the Middle Eastern population with music, song, and dance during the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and later introduced Americans to the lap harp and the oud.
They emigrated to this country and they played songs that they liked, but also that they thought Americans would like. Even though they don't speak the language, the melodies sort of stick in your mind and they have that accessible sound and feel that people enjoyed it. And then when you combine it with the belly dance, it was a very popular thing, an era back then, and it continues today.
Scott Wilson is a world-renowned musician who got his start in Greektown when he began playing music for his mother, the late legendary dancer Serena Wilson. Serena Wilson helped popularize Middle Eastern belly dance in the U.S. for over a span of 40 years.
When my mother was 17, my father had a ragtime band, and he played drums, and they got a performance where they wanted a belly dancer. So my mother, having studied dance, put on some veils and danced around with a jug, and sort of got the bug to pursue it further. And she studied some dance and got a job finally at the Egyptian Gardens nightclub. And she developed her own style, especially started dancing with 2 candles. That made her unique. And I think she started teaching, the school was called Stairway to Stardom. It was around 1960. And then it became Serena Studios.
My name is Dorit, and I've been with Serena Studios since 1998. I was always very interested in Middle Eastern culture and, travel in general and learning about what other people do or eat and think. And I saw an article in a New York magazine. Actually, somebody called me with the article. And 2 days later, I was at Serena Studios. And 2 weeks later, I was in Egypt with Serena. And when I came back, she started training me to be a professional belly dancer with Arabic bands, like live music. It was a really incredible time and incredible experience to have that.
She always stressed that she didn't want clones of herself. She wanted people to have their individual style through the basics of what she was teaching. And she had 9 basic body positions, and posture was at the top of the list.
The best thing about it is that you end up appreciating your body at whatever weight, age, height, doesn't matter. You start to really appreciate what your body can do naturally. And I think that's a gift.
Dorit continues to share her gift with others at Serena Dance Studios, while some of Serena's other dancers have chosen to teach at Belly Dance America, a dance studio whose foundation lies in a lot of Serena's techniques.
Many of the people who taught for Serena are teaching there at Belly Dance America, and also it's being taught at Championship Studios. So we're continuing the legacy with the teaching, and I set up the museum of Serena's collectibles of art and unusual items related to the dance and the music of belly dancing.
Serena Studios is a very magical place, and Serena was a very magical person, and she's trained so many people, and she's always in our heart. And I'm so grateful that this museum came to be, because this was one of her dreams, and it's so great to see everything in this one place. And I think anyone interested in dance history in general or Middle Eastern dance should really look into Serena, because she's our hero. And we love the studio, and we love Serena and the family.
The Serena Belly Dance Museum will be open from now until the end of December. Crystal Lowe for Independent Sources.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned. Till next time, be independent-minded.